Oh, what a house. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know where to live, but that's what we want.
Call to order the October 26, 2021 meeting of the North Andover Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This meeting of the North Andover Planning Board will be conducted both in person at the meeting location listed above and via remote participation. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting live may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 26, or online at www.northandovercam.org. In-person attendance of members of the public and board members will be permitted, and every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceeding as soon as possible after the meeting. If the public would like to participate in public hearings but not attend the meeting in person, please email your question or comment prior to or during the meeting to jenright@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be read during the proceedings and responded to accordingly. Since we are having some members remote, could you please do roll call, Jean?
Kelly Cormier,
Here.
Peter Boynton,
Here.
Alyssa Koenig. Here. John Simons.
Here.
Eitan Goldberg.
Here. Can those of, Peter, Kelly, can you guys hear okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Lot release, 174 Couture Street.
Okay, so this was a one-lot definitive subdivision approval. The roadway and house have been constructed and the site is stabilized. All required easements and maintenance documents have been provided. The developer would like the lot released from the covenant and intends to close on the property sometime in late November. And so I took some pictures. They're included in your packet. This is the driveway. If you remember, it was a paper street, Falmouth Street. It connects to Couture Street. There was a stone trench required for stormwater management to drain to this newly installed catch basin. The driveway required a T turnaround at the top of it for fire apparatus. And that's the house fully constructed and stabilized.
Oh, the house is built.
Yep, it's fully constructed and stabilized. So he's, a certificate of occupancy has not been issued yet, but in order to sell he needs to release it from the covenant.
Okay.
So if the house is done, the roadway's okay, then do they just want the lot release or the
Yep.
bond too?
Just the lot released. Eventually, for the CO, they're going to require to give me an as-built that will go to DPW and myself in
Okay.
order to sign up on the CO. Upon the CO, he's going to sell it.
Yeah, okay. Well, then assuming there's no other questions or comments, I would make a motion to approve the lot release for this lot.
Okay.
Second that motion.
Motion made and seconded. Roll call vote. Kelly?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Alyssa?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so if each of you could sign that as the majority of the planning board, and then I will notarize it and file it.
Okay. Gene, is this the agenda just this one page, no minutes or anything else after this, or is there a second page?
There are minutes. I'm not sure why I didn't print, I guess I didn't print both pages. So,
Is there anything other than that on the second page?
no,
Communications.
yes, communications.
All right, so let's do those now.
Okay. Communications is kind of carryover, just a reminder that the Mass DOT 25% design public hearing is being held on Thursday night. It's a virtual meeting. It's been sent out through town social media, so everybody should be able to have access to the link if you'd like to attend.
Okay, great.
Okay. Also, lake cleanup was held on October 16th, so I had announced that a couple weeks. It was really, really good success. We had at least 70 to 80 people in attendance. 950 pounds of material was pulled, so half a ton. Subsequent to that, Roland Ridge people had identified another tire in the lake, so Peter this past weekend was able to retrieve that tire. So it was really successful. Great weather, too.
Excellent work, Peter. Thank you. And Gene?
Tire number 25 pulled out of the lake. And Gene, can we give just a quick update on the status of the watershed plan?
Sure. So last night, the Board of Selectmen meeting, the Select Board meeting, we presented both the Route 125 corridor study that was done through Mass Development and grant funding. We work with Niche Engineering, so that study will be posted to the website soon. We also presented the watershed update plan from the 1987 watershed plan, which they did adopt last night. And so we have a fully functional plan that, of course, now takes some work for implementation, but it's, in my opinion, I mean, I think Peter would concur. We ended up, it was a lot of work, honestly, but ended up with a really good plan.
Okay, fantastic. All right, those all our communications?
Yep.
Okay, can we get the minutes, and which minutes are these?
So October 12th,
Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from October 12th, 2021?
So moved.
Motion made by Alyssa,
Second.
seconded. All in favor, Kelly?
Yes.
Peter?
Aye.
Alyssa?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes. Okay. All right, then we'll go into discussion items. So we'll go through these discussion items. I'd like people to make any comments or questions that they have. And then I think when we're done the discussion items, we'll talk about what the kind of next steps are moving forward procedurally. Okay. Royal Crest Estates, proposed master redevelopment plan for the property.
Okay, well, thank you for having us on this lovely evening here in October. So, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, we have a number of reports that we have presented or we have sent to you. We'll present tonight the information within those reports. Most of this is information that you've seen in some form, but all of the information has been updated with sort of the program adjustments we've made as we have gone through the process. I'm here with our engineers, Jeff Ketteritz and Matt Keeley from VHB. They will be presenting the traffic report as well as any of the civil engineering reports that we have. So we can start with, and just follow the agenda, but we can start with the fiscal impact update memo. So that is within your packet. Again, this is based off of the report that you have seen before, but these are just figures that are updated with the modified program that we presented to you in August. So these just adjust the figures as it relates to that program with the reduction in the number of residential units in particular. It adjusts the costs and it presents that to you.
So this is existing, that's the same as previously presented, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. This is still current we're looking at, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so just as a summary, since some of these things, some of these costs are estimates, we have a low estimate and a high estimate of a negative fiscal impact of between 470,000 and 1,600,000 rounding up. Obviously, you know, real estate is not meant to necessarily be a cost positive, but this is just good information for us to have as to what the actual numbers mean. Okay, great. And tell us about this chart, please, Michael.
Yeah, so this is the proposed Royal Crest. This was the, compares the estimated new revenues to the estimated costs and provides a net positive fiscal impact, removing from the equation the existing apartment revenues. So you can see that As the proposal stands today, that the net positive fiscal impact is between $3.7 and $4.8 million.
And what was it before with the higher number of units that we had? Just so we can just
We
understand.
can refer to the program summary. So we previously had a high fiscal impact estimate of 5.5 million, but on the low end, 3.2 million to 5.5 million. Within this report with the adjusted program, and that's really the next chart, the fiscal impact estimate is 2.1 million to 4.3 million.
So these numbers are the numbers upon full build-out, right?
That is correct, yes.
Steady state. So this is, the full set of numbers, if the project moved forward, would take close to 10 years to be realized, correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
And in doing that, how did you normalize the cost, and what did you assume over time for that?
So in the previous study that was presented to you, there was a phasing plan that looked at the costs over time. So that's not within this particular update, but that is something that we could provide to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are the expenses based on current cost or expenses based on future cost in terms of unit cost and so forth? And what is it with the revenue?
I understand the question. That is a question for the. Sure.
This is today's dollars. The taxes are projected for today, the expenses are projected for today. Over a 10-year period, expenses will increase, as will revenues.
Okay, okay.
What's the largest cost? Police and fire? So is police and fire services the largest municipal cost?
By far, schools.
Oh, schools, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so, and we can anticipate schools, police, and fire would probably start coming on sooner than some of the others as the residential coming on first, right?
Yes, that's
But-
correct.
But would, not all, the residential is still going to go over a period of many years in coming in, right?
Yes, that's correct. And
Okay.
it's expected, today there's 213 school-aged children who live at Royal Crest. We're actually in one scenario, it's expected that the number of school-aged children over time will actually go down as the nature of the site changes.
Okay.
But
This peer review again, and school capacity review again.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments, board members?
Just, Jean, did you say it has already gone to peer review or
Yeah.
it will go to peer review?
No, we just sent it a couple days ago, so we're aiming for the November 16th meeting to have a response back.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, the next update that we'll give is related to the traffic study. So I'll introduce Matt Keeley from VHB here, and he can walk you through the figures that are found within that report. Can you bring up the PowerPoint?
Great. Thanks, Mike. Again, my name is Matt Keeley. I'm a traffic engineer with VHB. I'm here to just give a basic status update on all things transportation. I'm going to basically give a summary of the letter that was submitted to you last week. If you go to the next slide, please. So just by way of history, we submitted our original traffic study in October 2020. In the winter, we went through a peer review process with Jeffrey Dirk and Vanessa & Associates. So Jeff prepared a peer review letter in the winter of '21. We prepared a response letter, And since then, we've had a lot of ongoing discussions with the town, Massdot, GPI, who's the designer of the 114 Corridor Improvement Project, and VAI, who's the peer reviewer. Most notably, we had a meeting at the end of September to talk about some of these outstanding issues with that same group and try to get to some consensus on those issues. One other notable thing, which you're well aware of, is that there's been a program reduction since our original traffic study. I'll go through that in a minute just to re-summarize that. Our initial intent was just to note that the program has gone down and that the impacts associated with the project would be a little bit less than we stated in our traffic study. But Jeff Dirk said that he would like to see some analysis at 3 of the intersections that we've been studying further since the October 2020 study. So on that chart there, you see the reductions by land use between the October 2020 traffic study and current. The most notable reduction is in the residential category, which has a reduction of 324 units. If you go down a little bit further on the chart, there's about a 6,000 square foot reduction in retail space, and then 46 fewer units of townhouses, and a modification to the senior housing. We have 35 units in our current analysis. In our previous analysis, we had lumped some of the senior housing into that residential category. Next slide, please. So with that reduction in program, you would expect a reduction in trip generation as well. So I've summarized that here in the table. Column on the left has the October 2020 program. The column in the middle has the current program, and the column on the right summarizes the difference. So in terms of weekday daily traffic, there's approximately 2,100 fewer trips with the current program, 119 fewer trips during the AM peak hour, 142 fewer trips during the evening peak hour. On a Saturday, about 1,700 fewer trips, and on the Saturday midday peak hour, about 180 fewer trips.
And I'm sorry, a question, can you just remind me, what are you comparing against? I know it says the difference, which is fantastic, but what date were you comparing to?
So the column on the left was from our original traffic study. The column in the middle is the current program, the current reduced build program.
Can you remind us?
No,
again?
I'm sorry, just the total, okay, sorry, I misunderstood. So it's total net new trips, not, sorry, I misunderstood. Thank you for clarifying.
So,
Okay.
but can you give us the numbers of what the current trips are and what the total trips are projected to be based on the current summary?
Yes, and that would be the middle column. So about 9,300 weekday daily trips, about 512 total weekday morning peak hour trips, 595 weekday evening peak hour trips, Saturday daily just over 10,000, and Saturday midday, it's a little bit obscured by the cursor there, 717 peak hour trips.
But those are what the new trips are, right?
Correct.
So what's the total new trips?
That is the total net new trips.
What? Then what's the number?
Yeah.
That whole middle column is the total net new trips.
How many I guess what I'm getting confused by each time, I don't know if this is there a count of the number of existing trips?
No, there's not. So that was going to be my next question once we
Yeah.
got this actually answered.
Yep.
The existing trips are in that memo, are in the letter that I sent you. I just didn't want to put too many numbers up on this.
Okay.
on
But
this
can
slide.
we-
The existing trips are in the letter that was submitted to you.
Okay. Oh, see, these are the net. These are okay. So the biggest number of new trips would be on a Saturday. You're saying 10,436 new trips, right? Okay. So, do we know how many trips there are on a current Saturday? Just so we can. So, I think I remember it being about 4,000. Was my memory? Mike, do we have that?
Copy of
So
the letter.
the daily number of existing trips is 4,488.
Okay, so 4,488 existing. We're adding at the maximum estimate 10,400 or so. So that puts us at about 14,800 total daily trips. Am I doing my math right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just what. And so before, I think it was 16,000 something. It went down about 2,000.
Yeah. The decreases are all on the column on the right.
No, I get that. So this is a nice chart showing us what the difference between the last program and with the reduced numbers, it's just helpful for us to just also think about it in terms of what the actual number of people that are going to be on there, not necessarily the difference. So
Understood.
that's,
Hey, Tom, can I ask a question? Go ahead, Kelly. I didn't mean
let's go
to-
Kelly, then Peter.
Yeah, I just want to finish up. So that goes back to then my question of when was the existing count taken? I
When
think you
were our
gave the one
existing
number.
counts taken? I believe it was
Yeah.
October of 18. I don't have that in front of me. I can pull it up on my computer, but
Okay. I'm just curious as if there's starting to be trends and changes of COVID, pre-COVID, as this continues along, if there's, if experts in traffic are starting to see any difference in trends to consider.
My
Hey.
drive back from Worcester last week tells me the traffic is pretty much back to normal.
I would go with that too, but I've actually, my traffic has changed. Before I'd make one big trip into Boston. Now I might take 3 trips within North Andover in a given day, which is what happens.
No, that's
changed
true.
3 times last week. So things, I'm just wondering, that's just one person. If there's, traffic industry is starting to consider that, if that is an actual change or that's
So-
happening.
It's a good, fair question. Have you, in your traffic analyses, have we seen anything that can be a quantifiable COVID change in traffic patterns in the area?
I think you're correct in saying that most commuting traffic is pretty much back, but there still is some variability, on local traffic. So a lot of people say that their commutes have gone back to the way they were. But in terms of consistent day-to-day traffic, it's still a little bit on the lighter side.
Okay,
I'm just trying to get the date of our original counts.
okay. Peter, well, why don't you get that while you're looking, then Peter, you'll ask your question, okay?
Yes, thank you.
October 2019 were our original counts.
Okay, October 2019, okay. Okay, Peter?
Yeah, thank you. We're looking at table number 2, is that correct?
Table number 2 in the letter?
Yes. Correct.
Yes.
In the October 20th letter, are we looking at table 2 on page 3? I'm asking, what table are you referring to as you went through the numbers with us?
It's in
That's
the,
in the PowerPoint presentation that's on the screen right now.
But not the same as table 2 in the letter?
Not the exact same, no.
Okay.
The table in
Well,
the PowerPoint
I'm-
just focuses on the differences between the 2 build programs.
And the table
Yeah,
in the memo
exactly.
has the existing column.
Yeah, I find this table in the letter is perhaps more helpful because it provides not only the difference between the 2 programs, but it also contrasts with the current existing. So is there any chance you could
yeah, let's
you
pull
could
that up.
put up
I'm bringing it
on
up
the
now.
screen table 2 from the letter?
And it's good that you have both of those, and we appreciate trying to get to the point of what we asked about the differences, but sometimes we like to go back and get the whole picture too. Okay,
So before I start with my questions, I just want to make sure I'm reading this table correctly on page 3 of the letter. The column on the left, to the left of the gray bar, that is what we could call current or existing trips from Royal Crest. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then the 3 columns on the right are comparing the original October 2020 program trips with the more recent August 21 program trips, and then the difference. But the difference is the difference between the 2 programs, not the difference between current and future, right?
Correct.
Okay, so thank you. So what I'm seeing is that if we look at the current trips, and I just want to make sure I'm interpreting this correctly, so tell me where I'm off base here. The weekday daily trips will roughly double from 4,500 to over 9,000. Am I reading that correctly?
Yep.
And then the weekday morning peak will double. The weekday evening peak increases, but it's less than doubling. Is that right?
Correct.
And then the Saturday daily trips increase by a factor of 5.
That's correct, roughly.
And then the Saturday midday increases a little over doubling, actually more like tripling. But I find this very dramatic. Saturday daily trips are going to increase 5-fold. What are your thoughts explaining that substantial increase?
Well, I mean, Saturday is definitely a lighter traffic day for some of the uses that are going to be on site. It's certainly a lighter traffic time period for Route 114. And with the Massdot improvements, even the existing infrastructure can accommodate that level of volume on a Saturday midday peak.
No, but
And-
I think the question is, why does it increase so much on Saturdays? What's special about Saturdays that makes there so many more trips?
Retail trips are typically tend to be higher on a Saturday.
So that's what what's going in. Is that what's going into that number? Is mostly retail because you're having less people working,
Yeah,
like
less
in the
people working.
offices. But so is that
Okay.
you're thinking people are going to the grocery store, going to the gym? Things
It's
like
a
that?
combination of residential and retail traffic on a Saturday. That's sort of
Sure.
the critical period.
Interesting.
Very helpful, thanks. So I want to now ask a couple questions, and I'll try to be brief. Looking at sort of these changes, can you put that back up? That's a very helpful table. This table 2 in the letter is a very, very helpful table.
It's
Great,
still up.
thank you.
It should still be up. We haven't moved it.
Okay, it was gone from my screen, but thank you. So I want to kind of look at this in total. You know, the weekday dailies, weekday morning, weekday evening, Saturday daily, Saturday midday. Actually, let me do it differently that I think will be faster. Let's look at weekday morning peak. We're doubling the number of trips in and out of Royal Crest. Now, on some mornings, when I'm driving from town into Boston and I go through the Mass Ave 125, 114 portion of the trip, I see days where cars are bumper to bumper from beyond Mass Ave to the intersection between 125 and 114. And they're sitting bumper to bumper in a line, waiting for cycles of the light to change between 125 and 114. And I mean, people get used to it, but it's horrifying. And I'm not saying that happens every day, but I have seen that. And I don't think it's unusual. We're going to double the number of trips from Royal Crest just down the line where the Andover bypass goes off towards from 114. And of course, that's what's relieving the traffic. That's where the traffic gets relieved. But if we double the number of cars at that point in time, I remember your traffic study, and you know, we went through the math, and I thought it was a very helpful explanation. But the answer of the traffic study is that the effect will be de minimis. But when I think we're going to double the number of cars from Royal Crest, which will slow down the traffic draining off onto the Andover bypass, and all those cars backed up on 125 down to Mass Ave, crawling, waiting for those lights to cycle over and over and over again, and doubling the number of trips at Royal Crest is only going to have a de minimis impact on that. I remember the math, but common sense doesn't agree with that. Help me understand why that's not going to have more than a minor effect in what is already very challenging traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest impact to capacity along this corridor is going to be the Massdot 114 corridor improvement project. Particularly that intersection with the bypass is undergoing a major overhaul and a significant increase in capacity.
So I think that's a very fair point, and I remember we were relieved to hear that when we went through the first traffic study, but doesn't this also indicate that whatever traffic relief the Mass DOT improvements were going to provide us, we're going to fill it up right away again with these trip increases from Royal Crest? We're not going to enjoy the benefit of those improvements because all that excess capacity is going to be consumed by this development.
I would say that's not exactly the case. As we mentioned earlier, this project is going to take 10 plus years to build out, and traffic studies like this one, particularly one with complex mixed use development, tends to drastically overstate trip generation, in my opinion. So one thing I need to just point out in terms of what future traffic is going to be like, we're going to be required by the state to undertake a pretty detailed traffic monitoring program as part of the project. Once the project is completed, we'll be required to monitor traffic for at least a period of 5 years after the development is complete. So that's basically essentially serving as a check on our trip generation projections, and also gives another opportunity for us to reanalyze those intersections and compare them back to our original study to see if there are any differences. Did we overstate our traffic? Do we need to adjust the lights in any way? Things like that. So I don't think you can really say that the capacity is just going to go away. It's going to be a gradual thing over time, and I think the capacity benefits of the corridor improvement project are going to be realized for quite some time as the project is built out.
So I want to ask.
But
hold on,
the
Peter.
capacity is also going to be filled over time by the increased trips from this project.
The project will take some of the capacity that's being gained from the corridor improvement project, yes.
So can I ask a follow-up, and then Peter, if you have other questions, we can go back to them. I just want to follow up on this point. So if you're doing this follow-up, or if we condition, follow-up as part of any special permits, or if it's part of any, development agreement that there'll be studies and traffic mitigation, what are some of the things that could be done? Because one worry that I would have is, okay, you start building the project, you have your permits, you're moving forward, the project's going to be there, and then Massdot project doesn't happen, or doesn't happen on the same timetable, or things like that, and now are we stuck? What kind of mitigation could be done kind of midstream to assist with traffic if it's more in a certain locations or things like that, or if there's more queuing on Mass Ave or on 114? What kind of stuff could actually be done kind of midstream that wasn't planned?
I guess I don't see that scenario happening with the status of Massdot improvements the way they are, and the schedule of the project.
So at least make me feel better that there's some other things that could be done, because we all know state projects, and yeah, right now everyone seems pretty committed to this, and it's moving forward, and we're having hearings, but stuff happens. Things get put on the back burner, and so I'm just kind of curious, if there are other places where you've seen mitigation take place mid-project with something you could do to improve traffic,
I guess I would say if the Massdot project were to go on hold or go away, then we would definitely have to take another look at what would be required to accommodate our traffic, and that mitigation would.
But what are some examples of things you could do, I guess is what I'm looking for.
If I understand the question, Eitan, if for some reason the state doesn't materialize, the money doesn't materialize, the work doesn't get done.
Or the numbers are more, like traffic, people love this place, but they have 3 cars instead, or everyone's coming, everyone loves that there's a Trader Joe's there, so instead of 5,000 people, you have 10,000 people. What are types of things that could be done midstream to mitigate problems, if there were? I know you say that these are overestimates, and that seems to jive with other, traffic studies we've had. I'm just looking what kind of stuff happens as mitigation.
I just want to take off the table, absolutely, that if the transportation improvements, the Massdot improvements aren't done, then we would not commence this project until they were done, or there was some certainty and that you were comfortable that they were happening. I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
So I appreciate that.
If we can't get there, if our residents can't get there, if the people going to shop can't get there, that's going to be a problem for us too. So we share our interest and alignment with that. In terms of what we can do after it's built, the MEPA process is going to require us to do a more comprehensive analysis of the traffic system beyond these intersections. It's very likely that they too will propose certain requirements and certain mitigation measures. It's not unusual. We expect that to happen. And we can look at specific things that we would want to do if, in fact, these projections don't materialize. If people have a problem getting here or leaving here, that's going to affect us. It's going to affect our residents. It's going to affect the value of the properties. So again, we have a shared interest in, you know, if you'd like, I think we could go back and look at some of the specific things we might be able to do if these projections don't turn out as expected.
Yeah, I was just more thinking like hypotheticals, like, okay, so if we find out that more people are coming in on Saturdays, can we shift parking or things like that, or make it time so that, you know, people are coming at different times? Can you put more, you know, in your roads that you're building, could you put more stop signs or even put lights so that traffic is flowing slower out of the development, therefore giving more time for people to, you know, flow through traffic?
And
Things like that. I have to imagine there are numerous amounts of different ways that you can control traffic within the property to either slow the number of people going or coming at any particular time, limit the hours of the establishments, things like
Yep,
that. There are,
yep.
to me, there seemed like a lot of different things you could do. I was just kind of looking for some potential examples.
we can certainly have a fair amount of control over the students. They're coming and going, the ones that have cars or faculty members that are parking there. The office, we could certainly control that. I think there's a lot of things that we can do to step back use if, in fact, you know, we're creating chaos in the intersections. Again, it's very much against our interest to have a scenario into which people can't come and go.
No, I agree, and I understand that I think these are unlikely hypotheticals, but I think one of our jobs here is to ask the
Sure.
what-if questions and at least be satisfied that there are contingencies in place. Not
One
that
of-
any
one
of
of
these
the
things are likely, but I think we need to ask those questions in case, you know, in case the numbers are wrong and the, you know, the anecdotal evidence that Peter and the rest of us see is correct, that something happens or something changes, because we know things change, so.
One of the things that we could do, I mean, we're pretty excited about the bus service that's contemplated. That's going to help us market these units. If you can walk out your front door and get in a bus, an express bus to Boston, and people are going to take advantage of that. One way to get people to take more advantage of it is to provide T-passes or other discounts. So people will be incentivized to use mass transit as opposed to getting in their car. And that's not uncommon, and it's something that we would certainly contemplate, because having the service at this site, we believe, is going to be a tremendous benefit to the residents, but it's also going to keep more cars off the road.
So I think, so that's a really.
And that's one example, and
That's a good
there's
example.
others that we could certainly suggest, and again, I think our interests are aligned on that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anyone have follow-up questions to that?
I do.
John, go ahead.
First, just one technical question with the heading on Table 2. It says, total net new trips. It's not really the incremental number of trips, it's the total number of trips under the new scenario, right?
That is the number of new trips under the,
It's the number of new trips, so if you say today the weekday daily is 488 or whatever it is, are you saying the total is going to be
16,000.
4888 plus 9354?
yes.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, so that's the incremental, okay. Okay, I was not aware of that. Now, then, I assume, just again, a procedural question, When you do weekday daily and Saturday daily, today, they're the same, which assumes you must measure it just one way and assume that you gotta go in and out, right?
The dailies, yes, we assume 50/50 for
Yeah,
daily.
okay. So here's one thing I don't understand, and it's true of all your numbers. If the weekday daily is, 4488 today, and the morning peak is 256, that's a pretty low number. I mean, if you take 4488 and divide by 20 hours a day, which is ridiculously high, you get over 200. Those peak numbers look really low.
Well, remember, the peak numbers are pretty much just people exiting, right?
Well, no, but see, that's part of the problem, is that it's enter and exit, and incrementally, what I don't understand is, why would there be so many incremental enters during rush hour? But the bigger problem is that if there's going to be under 9354 weekday total incremental trips, and only 500 of them are occurring during morning peak, that intuitively doesn't make sense, because that's like the average of 24 hours a day. So that's not a peak. There's something wrong in that. It doesn't make sense intuitively. It's got to be higher. If the total numbers are right, the daily peak numbers have to be wrong.
Well, the peak hour traffic tends to vary between about 6 to 10% of daily traffic.
Are you saying if you take 24 hours a day and divide the total by 24, the peak's only 10% higher than that? I'd find that hard to believe. I mean, Peter, just from what you were saying about the traffic and everything, it's got to be substantially higher. There's got to be a lot more cars going through at peak times. Those numbers look low.
Is the morning peak, what, is the morning peak 1 hour?
Yes.
So you're saying 10% of, 10% of the people exiting or so, or this is about 8%, they're saying on a weekday is during that 1 hour.
It doesn't make sense. And then what you're saying is under the morning peak, there's not going to be any more people leaving the property during the peak hour than there are today. There's a lot more coming in, which that doesn't make sense to me either.
Well, there's a lot more coming in
If
because
today
there's
it's mostly people exiting in the morning, as you would expect.
a lot more people coming in because we're going to have office uses where people will be coming in the morning.
Well, then why is not the exit going to go up at all with more units?
No, so the enter numbers go up because those are people coming to work at the offices and retail.
The peak number, I think, is understated. I can't believe if you have an extra 9,400 trips a day, you're only going to get 500 during that peak period.
Well, let's do that. Why don't we do this? I mean,
Well,
why don't we, well, hold on. Why don't we send this to peer review, right? Can you specifically ask them to look at the peak numbers and what is a generally accepted number of, like, a percentage of a peak? Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying makes sense, John, but I'm,
and if I could just clarify too,
I know.
it's the numbers you see in this table here have gone through several steps to get there, and that is something that Jeff Dirk has peer reviewed. It's a table that's this long with triple the number of columns there, so it's not just going from a daily number to a peak number. There are a lot of factors that went into the overall calculations, which have been peer reviewed. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that this has been thoroughly reviewed.
okay, so let's get our peer reviewer just to comment on that specific question.
And he did comment on his original review. This
Okay.
is just basically the modification to the build program, but all the same methodology that he's reviewed in the past.
So that the October 2020 peak numbers, and so that was already reviewed and
Correct.
agreed,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, but let's hear it again. It's an important
So,
point.
Tom,
Yeah,
I think John raises some very interesting questions here about sort of the structural integrity of some of these numbers. I think we ought to have our peer review analyst back so we can ask him these questions, because I've not heard an adequate explanation. I mean, it looks to me like, I mean, just take the weekday morning peak August 2021 program. That's roughly, 1/18th of the weekday daily, 9354. Is this saying that the morning peak is the same as the rest of the 18 hours? And that's actually suggesting that there's more per hour in the 23 hours off the peak than there is in the peak. There's something here that is, I agree with John, that's not making sense. So can we think about having our peer reviewer back so we can direct questions to them?
Sure, we can ask. But again,
Great. And I have one other comment, Lieutenant. When I first went through this table, I was asking questions from the presenter. Quite sincerely, I wanted to make sure I understood the table. And let's take the top one. I said, so for the weekday daily, 4488 to 9354, so it's roughly doubling the trips. Is that correct? And I was told, yes, that's correct. But based on John's very helpful clarification, that's not correct. It's tripling the trips in weekday daily, because it's not 4488 going to 9354. It's 9354 plus 4488. So the reason I asked that question was to see if I was reading the table correctly, and I went through all 5 categories.
I know.
I have to say that I'm really a little bit offended that I was not given the correct answers to my questions. Saturday daily is not a 5-fold increase. It's a 6-fold increase.
Well,
and if it wasn't for John clarifying this, we would not have known. And that's the reason we're asking these questions. And quite frankly, I expect better answers. I'm really troubled by this.
I'm pretty sure that's what I said in the beginning. That's why I was trying to, maybe I wasn't clear. That's why I was saying that these were net new, so you have to add those to the existing to get the total.
Yeah,
Okay, but
I apologize if
but
I
Aton,
misunderstood.
I understand, Aton, but then I asked for each row, am I reading this correctly? And I gave my interpretation, and 5 times I was told yes. And in fact, all of those are wrong.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, again, that's the problem. We seem to run into this problem each time we do this, like the same exact problem. So the new trips are 9,300. The existing trips are 4,400. The total weekday daily trips are the sum of those two. So if you then take the sum of those two and divide it by the existing, you get the actual increase percentage of new trips.
Which is tripling in the example you just gave, not doubling. And so I'm still
Sure,
baffled why I didn't get the advice I was looking for when I asked that question.
No, I agree, but I just think, I think we just get the doubling and tripling gets confusing when which we're talking about. So
Right. And
maybe
if
it's just easy. Hold on, maybe it's just easier if we just use actual raw numbers, because
Well, I think he's trying to explain what
Go ahead.
happened. I'd like to hear the explanation.
God,
No, I apologize if I misunderstood. I was looking for something on my computer at the time, and the table that I'm looking at has 17 columns that is boiled down to what's on that sheet of paper. So I apologize if I gave an incorrect answer, but we have a lot of information here that gets boiled down to that final table. So there's a lot of numbers flying around here. So
let's just go through this one more time to be really clear, just so everyone knows. Our weekday daily trips currently are approximately 4,500 trips.
Mhm.
We're going to add 9,300 trips to that based on the August program. 9,300 plus 4,500 is 13,800. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going from 4,500 to 13,800. Okay. And then let's do Saturday daily, because that's the most. Currently, there's 2,000 trips. It's going to about 10, new trips, 10,000. So the actual numbers go from 2,000 trips a day to 12,000 trips a day. Correct?
Correct, about 12.5, yep.
Okay, okay. And, all right, and so, yeah, so we just got to be careful when we say double, quadruple, what we're actually talking about, but the difference in trips goes from 2,000 to 12.5, okay?
Yeah, and the detailed table that has all the columns is in the attachments to the letter that was submitted. So this table is not meant to exclude anything because the letter included the full detailed table, which has all those numbers in it.
Which is good. It's just hard for us sometimes to pinpoint and have a good discussion about those details, and especially for members of the public. What Peter's trying to do is really give people something that's easy to understand and comprehend. So when we talk about doubling and tripling, it's easier, I think, for the general public to understand. Sometimes it's better for us to just kind of talk about the numbers, but I think Peter's right, and then that's the way that most people's kind of brains think. So it just gets sometimes confusing, and I agree, you've given us all the information in the different charts, but we just got to be careful with how we describe things in these numbers, that's all.
Yeah, and if I could clarify as well, just about process, like we have been before you, and this, a very detailed, if you recall, a very detailed report was submitted to you. It was peer reviewed by your peer reviewer and essentially confirmed as far as all the data. So the data shown for existing and the data shown for October 2020 went through that process and was confirmed, peer reviewed, and essentially, I want to say signed off, but was at least reviewed in its entirety for consistency with engineering principles. What this was meant to do is to show the changes from that originally proposed program to where we were in August. So we've done that. This is, and has been noted, it has been submitted to your peer reviewer and will be fully reviewed again. But we're here to answer questions so we can continue that process.
Yeah, and it's been a long time that we've been talking about this, and we're coming down to the point now where we're going to start, trying to move forward in the process, and traffic's a big deal. So that's why it's just important for us to refresh and go kind of back to the beginning to get the global picture of, okay, now that we've talked about these numbers and really getting answers, like John said, about how did we get to some of these numbers, because we very well may have talked about it with Jeff Dirk in that 2-hour meeting about traffic 10 months ago, which was fascinating and very interesting at the time, and I thought it was good. And we probably did come to we may have even talked about morning peak, but I don't remember, and I think it's a fair question just to come up again now as we look at the data a second time. So I do want to hear just a little bit more from our peer reviewer about, is this 8-9% a kind of a standard figure for weekday morning peak? And are there other questions in terms of the methodology that we specifically want to address? Because right now the peer reviewer is just kind of looking at, are these numbers kind of fair as a change in the program summary? So we can ask about the peak. Is there anything else that people want to ask about? I mean, I'd like to hear if he has any opinions about post-COVID traffic pattern changes.
Just one other, I'm not sure if it falls under methodology or not, so stop me if it doesn't. But one of the things is I'm looking at traffic as I'm trying to understand what's the impact, positive or negative, to kind of the average North Andover resident, right? Looking at this, it talks about different intersections in the grades, some better, some worse. After the work gets done and the site gets built. And I'm wondering, do you have any information on kind of what does the average North Andover person do driving through town? Where do they go? What's the typical type of trip that someone takes, maybe dropping their kids off and then going to work, in whatever way that is, and so that we could look at it and go, hey, this project, once we do the improvements, it adds 4 seconds to 10 people's commutes. Not a big deal. I'm just trying to understand kind of day in the life impact, because I think that's what people would need to know. Not that I'm going to be waiting 2 more seconds at this intersection if I'm in this lane or that lane, but what's the impact to someone, the average person, the resident of the town, their average trips through town?
Good question. I'm not sure that we can, I'm not sure there's a way to analyze that because it's going to be different for I mean, literally
You can't-
like, no, I'm
You
just,
can't hit everybody, right? But, you know, do 15% in town commute to Boston? Okay, then yes, no.
Okay.
Do 10% drop their kids off at the middle school at the school complex, then get stuck in traffic going in one direction or the other? 'Cause think, some people are going to have more traffic. That's just life. Things are changing. Some people might have less, but just to have some fact and data behind, the impact's small, might be bigger for a small amount, but negligible for the rest of us. So at least then we can understand it. Puts it all together.
I mean, I think we can ask the question, but again, I'm just trying to struggle of how you would quantify that. Because
Yeah,
like your idea of how many people go to Boston, that's a good one. And there may be a way to quantify that, but I don't know how many of them take 495 or 93. Like if I were to go to Boston, I'd jump on 95, just from where I live and from where different people live in town. Some people might go north on 495. Some people might get off Sutton Street and get on 495. I mean,
just
my
in the
guess-
world of traffic experts, right? Like
Right.
someone might have those types of counts or at least be able to make some judgments or estimates or assumptions to be able to say, hey, only 5% of the people in North Andover commute to Boston
Well, we
and go
may-
down the bypass. So
we
it's a
m-
small amount. I just don't know.
One thing we may be able to do, John, one thing we may be able to ask is, are we confident? So we've had the question, we've had lists of different intersections that would be impacted. Could we ask if there are any other intersections that may be impacted? Because it seems to me that 85% of the town's not going to be, intersections are not going to be impacted at all, maybe more. In terms of how many people go through, 114, Mass Ave 125 on what percentage of the town? I don't know. John, any thoughts on?
Well, yeah, along those lines, I mean, I think unless you spent an enormous amount of money over an extended period of time, it would be hard to get that with any mathematical precision, but you can, I think, do proxies of that, and you could probably talk to the police department about that. But I mean, there are certain points that are congestion points. We know they are. I mean, they already are today. The example of middle school at certain times. If many people leave the middle school going down Chickering Road and then want to go to work in Boston, that's a choke point. I mean, the other one is you get into some indirect effects that are really hard to measure is that people avoid 114 at certain times of the day, and they go down down Salem Street through the old center, and traffic in the old center at 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock is horrible. And, that's a second order effect, but it's hard to measure exactly what the causal factor is. So there's probably some data we should know about where are the choke points and when do they occur. That maybe might be helpful, but I bet you could get that from the police department.
One thing I just want to point out, though, in terms of what everybody's typical commute is today is not exactly relevant in this context because the Massdot corridor improvement is going to have such a dramatic effect on that 114 corridor. So that's why in our traffic studies we compare no build conditions to build conditions to identify our impacts. So it really is not something we can relate back to today's current commuting conditions because it's going to be very different once those improvements are in place.
I mean, I agree to a certain degree. That's fair. I mean, because obviously they wouldn't undertake this major program unless it was going to have a major substantial impact. But I think having gone on the stretch of Andover Street, taking that left on 114, that is absolutely brutal. And I question with the amount of geography there, how much they're ever going to be able to completely improve that. I mean, I'm skeptical that they can get the improvements they think they're going to be able to get there. It's just,
I would agree, John. I see Andover Street back up multiple times in a week back towards the Common. So
Yeah, and that's going to have a double left turn lane as part of the improvement program.
yeah, I just don't think it will ameliorate the problem quite as much as people think it will.
So, okay, but to Kelly's question, Well, why don't we put it as is to the traffic consultant, and if he says it's not a question that we can really answer, then it's not a question. But is there a way to calculate how this would affect? So, we'll get the answers about how this affects, really the traffic right at this area. But how does it affect the traffic in daily for the town as a whole? And are there ways that if we don't have an answer to that, that we could, even by proxy, look to kind of get information on that? So let's ask.
Yep, so just a little bit of a backstory on how we pick a study area. Basically, especially in MIPA projects, Massdot has guidelines on which intersections you have to analyze because of how much traffic you're adding to them. So as you'll see in a typical study area, the impacts will start, be the biggest at your site, and then will sort of fade away as you go out. And Massdot has thresholds of, what intersections you have to look at. And, if an intersection has an increase of 100 trips or more, it has to be part of your study. So our study is looking at the most impacted intersections for this project.
No,
And as you go outside of the study area, you're going to have less and less of an impact.
sure, but I mean, and again, it's hard to study, but to John's point, I mean, especially with, Google Maps and Waze and stuff like that, it does seem that there are certain corridors when their traffic becomes heavy in one place, that even if it's heavy here, that people know that it's going to be heavy here, so then they divert, and they may not even ever get there, but there are other ways that they go where traffic winds up being heavier. And I don't know that there's a good way to study that or plan for that or even until after it happens,
I
which is
agree.
again why I asked about some of the mitigation stuff. But we do know that that happens, whether it's Salem Street or, going up Hilldale to Chestnut or something like that. They're, like I'll get off 114 a lot earlier because I don't want to deal with some of the traffic down further on. Depending on where I'm going,
Yeah.
I might be willing to go a mile further or 2 minutes longer just because I hate sitting in traffic. So I'm not sure that it's quantifiable, but there is some intangible effect that's somewhat hard to
Right,
to study.
and we will see some indication of that as part of the monitoring program.
Okay.
Because we'll be able to identify the actual trip distribution, where people are arriving from and going to and from the site. So we have a trip distribution that we calculated in our study, and when we do our accounts, when the project is built, we'll be able to see where people are actually coming from. So that's something that gets evaluated as well.
Okay, so these some good questions, some good commentary. Why don't we keep moving through the traffic study?
If you could put the PowerPoint back up. Where were we? Trip generation. And then, yep, that's the one. So our initial intent as part of our letter was to say that, the program has been reduced, therefore our impacts would be reduced. And we weren't originally planning on doing additional analysis, but Jeff Dirk requested as part of that meeting on September 27th that we reanalyze 3 of the key intersections that he had raised concerns about in his letters. The first of which is Route 114 at Waverly Road, Couture Road. Like I was saying earlier, this is one of the intersections that's a little bit on the outer edge of the study area. The columns on the left are the 2027 no build from our October 2020 study. The middle columns are the build conditions from the 2020 study, and the columns on the right are the build conditions with the reduced program. Now, because that is one of the outer intersections, you don't see much of a difference. I think all the delays and levels of service stayed the same at this intersection with the reduced program. So no real impact here. If you could go to the next one.
Well, no change in impact.
Correct, yeah. As we get a little bit closer to this site next one. With Turnpike Street at Andover Street and Elm Street. As you compare the middle column to the right column, you're starting to see a little bit of a reduction in delay. Things get a little bit better in the morning, evening, and Saturday in terms of delay, but level of service remains the same.
And does this, just as a reminder, does this include the Mass DOT project?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the last one that he wanted us to look at was 114 at the Royals Crest driveway. And this is where you start to see more of an appreciable difference with the reduced program In the morning, we see a reduction of 3 seconds of average delay. The evening, which was our main concern, has an 18-second reduction in delay and goes from level service F to level service E. And on Saturday, we see a 12-second reduction in delay and improvement from level service D to level service C. So that's one of the things that that Jeffrey really wanted to see was, is there more or additional capacity added back into those intersections with the reduced program? And that's what these tables are showing. And again, just want to circle back to the monitoring program. This is something we can revisit again with real numbers once those monitoring counts are done, and reanalyze those intersections to see if these impacts are actually happening.
I'm sorry, just a question on the last table. I want to make sure I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the intersection 114 and the existing Royal Crest intersection in now. And then it shows, so the first set of numbers, it's in 2027 if nothing changes, no build conditions at all. No
Correct.
build, the Royal Crest doesn't go in,
Mhm.
but and that does assume the improvements?
That assumes the improvements, yes.
Okay, so it says the delay at the intersection would be 15 seconds.
Yep.
Then it says, if we just skip to all the way to the right with because that's the reduced build program, the program that's on the table now, it says in a weekday evening where if it wasn't built, it would be 15 seconds. Now it'll be 75 seconds. So I just want to make sure I understand. So it's saying there'd be an extra, for someone in a weekday evening driving down 114 at that turn, the wait, which would have been 15 seconds, would now be 75, so it'd be an extra minute at that intersection. Am I reading that correctly?
That's not for one particular movement, that's for the intersection as a whole. So we have it all summarized in our study for every single movement, but that doesn't really show very well on a table like this. These are the overall intersection level of service.
So but it is 60 seconds, it's an additional 60 seconds
Correct.
of something?
Correct, yeah.
And what is, do we know, I mean, again, it's not on this chart, but do you have offhand what it is today without the corridor improvement project?
Well, today there's no intersection there. It's median divided.
Oh, fair enough, okay. Doesn't exist, okay.
Yeah, just to note, like right now, the ingress and egress to Royal Crest is not terribly good. Right now, there's no intersection there at all. If you want to go eastbound on 114, you have to take a right out of Royal Crest and then drive further through North Andover, either somehow do a U-turn and go eastbound, or otherwise get out. What this is proposing, what the corridor improvement is proposing, a new intersection that would serve Royal Crest, but also serve Merrimack College, and provide better ingress and egress to both of those uses on 114.
Kelly, the question answered?
Yes.
Okay.
So before I go on to the other comments, I just want to just wrap up what I was saying about revisiting that analysis as part of the traffic monitoring program. So there are several other comments that we wanted to address, and I just sort of wrote them down here, and I can run through them real quick, and just a quick bullet response of what we put in our letter that was submitted last week. So in the context of those three intersections that we just discussed, VAI had said that they wanted us to take a look at, just see if there's any additional capacity that could be added at those locations beyond what Massdot is proposing. So we took a look at a few different things, and some of them aren't feasible, but just wanted to give you a quick summary of what we looked at as part of that analysis. The first one was just a simple confirmation. There was a question about whether or not the corridor improvement project included adaptive signal technology along the corridor. Massdot and GPI confirmed that that is the case, and the current plan is to have adaptive traffic signals as part of the project.
What does that mean?
It's basically the latest technology in traffic signals. So during that peak hour, the signal controller can shift the cycle length, shift intersection, green time splits, things like that in real time, because it's sort of counting the vehicles as they pass through the intersection. So you're not just setting a time, green times for an hour during the peak hour. The signal is actually adjusting it based on real-time traffic volumes. So it's adapting to real-time traffic conditions, which is why they're calling it adaptive traffic signal technology.
So, for instance, if there were more cars on 125 than there were on 114, that light may move 5 seconds faster, and the light on 114 5 slower to get more people through 125. Or
Yes.
vice versa, something along those lines.
Yeah, and the more important way it does things is, say for the mainline traffic during commuter hours, as the signal starts to detect the volume ramping up, it'll start to give that more green time to accommodate the the increase in demand. So next one of the first potential capacity enhancing strategies we looked at was to install a right turn lane on 114 into the site at Royal Crest Drive. A couple of things we noticed right away was that in doing this, we would be widening 114 by approximately 12 feet. We thought that was a little bit counterproductive by making the pedestrian crossing longer, which could introduce some safety impacts, and really isn't consistent with the complete streets principles that Massdot is trying to implement along the corridor. We also noted that in our analysis, during peak times, the vehicle queues on 114 would frequently block access to that right turn lane, which would sort of diminish its effectiveness. We were also asked to take a look at potential for widening the two-lane sections at 125 and Andover Street and Waverly Road approaches to 114. We actually discussed this with Massdot in one of our meetings and discussed it at our last meeting on September 27th. We definitely ran into right-of-way constraints as we tried to extend those widenings onto the side streets a little bit further. That started to interact with adjacent driveways and making the design of that very difficult. So there was definitely some constructability challenges. And we really thought that there was just limited benefits to capacity by extending those lanes a little bit longer. Another topic which we've already talked about a little bit was to coordinate with the MVRTA to extend bus service to the site or operate a private shuttle either alone or in partnership with Merrimack College. The project team did meet with a representative of the MVRTA, and we discussed what the options were. It was a very constructive meeting. We looked at 2 different existing bus routes that could be extended into the site, one which is connecting to the commuter rail in downtown Andover, and an express bus to Boston. So with the way we left it, there was, there's definitely something all parties are interested in, and the proponent will continue to coordinate with the town and the MVRTA and with Merrimack. And one point I just want to make here, as we were talking so much about trip generation earlier, is that our study did not take any credit for any reductions in traffic volumes that would be associated with people choosing other modes of transportation. So that's just another layer of conservatism that's built into our trip generation projections.
It would also be pretty easy to have a private bus with 20, seats on it every hour from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Just circle around the property, drive to the T, and drive back. It would be a pretty low cost and a pretty good benefit to get just some cars off the road, and I think something that people could. I've seen that in bigger complexes, more in closer, urban areas like outside DC and things like that. But if you couldn't do it with MVRTA, there's no reason you couldn't do it privately easy and wouldn't be much of a cost.
Yeah, and that plays into the next one here. Provide a comprehensive transportation demand management program that includes access to transportation alternatives and financial incentives to use alternative modes of transportation. So we're going to continue to work with the town and the MVRTA on those alternatives, and I think those will come to fruition. But like you said, if there are other opportunities to do private shuttles, then that's something that we'd be willing to look at as well. The proponent will work with tenants to outline financial incentives for employees. As Jim was mentioning earlier, if there's incentives to provide subsidized T-passes, things like that, those are the types of measures that we'll be looking at. Definitely something that Massdot will be looking at as part of the MEPA process. So that's where we sort of, solidify those details as part of our MEPA process with Massdot. And then the last major item was the pedestrian bridge. This was also a topic of discussion at our December 27th meeting. One of the main things we started off by talking was noting the significant grade changes that would be required to construct a bridge like that. Would require a lengthy ramping system. which results in a much longer path for pedestrians that want to cross 114. And if you wanted to look at a type of system where you want to extend those ramps further into Merrimack or further into Royal Crest site, then that makes that more difficult for pedestrians who are already on 114 to access those ramps. And one of the main concerns that we have with that is that if the crossing is not convenient, then people will tend to just cross 114 at grade anyway. And in that case, it would be an uncontrolled condition, which could be very dangerous. At-grade crossings are designed as part of the Massdot process, as part of the improvements, as part of the traffic signal. And a few more things we looked at for the pedestrian bridge. We were also asked to look at evaluating connecting the bridge to an upper floor of the proposed buildings. One of the downsides of that is there's no receiving building on the Merrimack side of 114, so that is, again, penetrates into the Merrimack side of things. And then on the Royal Crest side, isolating pedestrian connection to one building within Royal Crest would definitely limit access to the general public, and also might deter people from using the crossing and choosing to cross at grade uncontrolled.
Hey, Tom, can I pose a question here?
I was going to pose one, and can I go first?
Of course, yeah,
Okay.
of course.
What's the closest building on Merrimack to where the dorms are proposed? Jeff, is that a question for you?
Do you have that one, Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff Kedrick with VHP. It's probably McQuaid Library. Ballparking it, I'd say it's at least probably 100 to 200 feet from the, at least from the right of way. We'd have to follow up and check the dimensions, but it's a good ways set back. Certainly not as close on the Royal Crest side.
Okay.
We could follow with that dimension though.
Yeah, okay. Peter? I don't know if that was you.
Yeah, thanks, Eitan. I take your point that there's no building on the Merrimack side. What did Merrimack College say in response to that when you posed that question for their side of the road?
Is that something?
Any Jeff?
Sure. I guess I hadn't posed that. Just
Why don't we, switch?
Jeff Doggett, Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Operating Officer at Merrimack College. Peter, thank you for the question. Just without boring everyone to tears, I just want to go backwards for a moment to the decision to put the crosswalk and the sidewalks in, because if we go back to that point, that was Merrimack's effort actually to get a overpass over 114. That was our goal in that we had talked to what at the time was the beginning of the Baker administration. There was a particular amount of capital that was available at that time. The college ultimately decided to fund 50% of a project, which was the crosswalk and then the sidewalk that is on the Merrimack side of 114 and the sidewalk that is on the Royal Crest side of 114. The goal there was to be able to combine the business districts, if you will, between what is at the Bertucci's intersection and then what was then the Fuddruckers strip mall, right? So you'd cross the street, go in front of Merrimack, cross the street across 114, and then take the sidewalk the rest of the way. Our understanding of why the overpass did not work is almost exactly what we're hearing today. That for somebody to be able to access that ramp, there'd be a considerable amount of sidewalk that would have to be at an angle, right, the handicap access, to be able to get up to that ramp and then go across, and then there'd have to be a ramp of equal size on the other side, which is Royal Crest, right? That would then have to be made public, right, because it's not just people at Royal Crest or just Merrimack that would be crossing 114, and then you'd have to have access back to the sidewalk to be able to get back to the public way so you can get to either of the business districts, if you will, either the corner or the strip mall. We still pushed for a overpass. There was a lot of conversation about air rights from the state and things like that. And ultimately the decision was that in the absence of being unsuccessful in getting anything, we went with the crosswalk. So just to answer your question first, Peter, about where's Merrimack on this project, right? I would argue we sort of face the same exact problem. So what we're talking about here is saying, okay, could Merrimack connect a current building, take a portion of the inside of that building or put an attachment on that building, which currently is a good 70, 80 feet into the campus and away from the public sidewalk, which we would then have to make available to anyone on the public street to be able to get into that facility, be able to then take an elevator up, and then take a very now longer overpass, right, which would then go over the parking, which is on 114 on our side, which is what's in between the sidewalk and the building, go over that, and then go over the highway, right, to get to the other side, to get to another building, which would presumably be Merrimack's, which would then require it to then have an open access to be able to come up and come down, and then be able to get people back out onto the public sidewalk, right? So the only other option then is to build another whole building onto the campus, which would be in the parking lots that exist today. You would still have, similarly to the problems that exist that I just described, which is how do you get public in and public out, you would still have the scenario that that would be cumbersome enough, under what we believe would be cumbersome enough, that people would look at that and say, am I entering that building to go up into an elevator or a ramp within the building to go across when I can just cross when the light turns red at a crosswalk that's in an intersection? Forget about whether there's a crosswalk. There's actually an intersection that'll be there. We agree with the state that that's highly unlikely someone's going to traverse all of that activity when there's a red light and all the traffic is stopped and they can just go across the street, right, or across 114. The last thing I would say is, and just in total candor, is that while we certainly would love to have had the overpass to begin with, and if there was a way to do it now, I would go to great extent. But I'm not entirely sure that, especially based on the presentation I did 2 weeks ago, that asking the institution to consider building a building just so there could be an overpass to another building for a project that we believe would be great for the town and for Merrimack and for everybody else, but asking us to then spend multi-million dollars for a building that is currently in a place where we need parking, I think that would be a pretty long conversation, I guess is the best way I would say that, right? Again, a long-winded answer, Peter, but I appreciate in the previous meeting you gave me the opportunity to stick with my academic view. Does that answer your question?
I appreciate the comments, Jeff. I also understand the point that you and the presenter before you are making about not only the 1,000 students being able to cross 114 safely multiple times a day, but also public access. So, just for the record, I don't agree with that presentation. We've tried hard to explore all of the options to provide reasonable safety to this very large cohort of students that'll be crossing multiple times a day, a road that will be far more busier in the future than it is today. I think the common sense notion would be that, of course, there'll be a crosswalk. There'll be a crosswalk directly connecting the sidewalks that'll be available to the public or students. And if there were a way to efficiently provide an aerial walkway connecting the 1,000 student dorm, that could provide a very safe way for students to be crossing. And it doesn't mean that the public has to have access to that if the crosswalk is also there. So again, I do appreciate your comments.
If I could, Peter, I appreciate you're making a distinction between what would be available to the public and what would be available only to the institution, right? Because you through that lens, I better understand the perspective that you're taking. I think the only thing that I would add, just for context, is the sheer number of students that are currently going across 114, right? That's not marketably increasing. Back to your point, right? If we believe that there's 800 plus students that are over there today, right? And we get to the 1,000, right? There is obviously an increase. I won't trap myself in the percentages, but it's not like we're talking about going from 0 students to 1,000, in which case the impact on a crosswalk is hugely different. Having said that, I do recognize, and we've been very public about this when we first tried to do the sidewalk project, right? It started with trying to do an overpass, but to get that done just between the college and the state, let alone anybody else, was so difficult. And again, air rights and all the rest of that stuff, I think it just got to that point.
So I don't want to belabor Eitan or Jeff, but again, I appreciate your comments. And a fair point that we're not going from 0 to 1,000 students, but I think it's also a fair point that crossing 114 will be more challenging in the future than it is today. It will be a far busier road. I think the crosswalk solution that you were able to achieve really was a terrific initiative for student and community safety, and you should be complimented on that, and I think you have been. But it also sounds like you tried to move heaven and earth to get a elevated walkway, and I would just offer the challenge of a larger group of students crossing a busier road will only be higher. And there is now an opportunity that did not exist before for that aerial walkway. And the opportunity is a multi-story student dorm, were this project to go ahead, on the Royal Crest side. That gives you a launching and landing point on that side of the road that does not involve these very inefficient ramps. And it may be the case that there is no way to provide a similar elevated landing and launching point on the Merrimack College side. Fair point. There may be no way. But it's an opportunity that you did not have when you first were trying to solve this problem. So I think certainly worth raising.
Peter, I do greatly appreciate it, because there is no question that one of the stumbling blocks at that time was there was no place to land on the other side of 114. So you are exactly right. We're in a different position today than we were then. I'm not in any position to speak on behalf of the state. I would imagine air rights still remains an issue, but I would say this. Should this project reach a point where it reaches a public conversation, I certainly on behalf of the college would be very open to exploring what that might look like into the future, because again, it's really hard to argue against safety, right? I'd even go so far as to say that without a traffic signal there, right, that's constantly being tapped on for students crossing the street, it may have a marketable impact on traffic as well, right? But I just want to be clear, I don't think it's a lack of interest or a lack of attempt on behalf of either the college or the development team, as much as there are multiple sets of things that one's going to deal with. The state being one, and then the conversation that we would have about, and I take very seriously, your perspective, and Kelly's especially, and John's I think has also mentioned this, is what is this 114 corridor and how does it look? And what happens when you are then putting a walkway across? There's some groups do that very, very well. As a resident of North Andover, I passed the one at the high school. I would say if that were a route we would take, I would not do that route from a look. But I think you could understand and appreciate that that's something that goes beyond just this conversation. That's really a public discussion about what that looks like and what the future is, because that really becomes a portal.
So, John, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a slightly different question.
Sure.
This is a combination of this and the general traffic situation. Remind me, in the future, if the development proposal goes in, are there going to be two traffic intersections on 114 as opposed to one?
So,
Signalized intersections?
to go across,
Yeah,
Between
like
the-
one
between
where, one where we
There's
already
one.
have the signalized one and one near where the crosswalk is.
where the crosswalk is roughly, is where there will be a intersection where you could drive in 114 and get into the campus or get onto Royal Crest. There is no other place where that happens again.
Okay,
There
but
are
what about the, I guess, where the existing intersection of 125 and 114 is there still gonna be a light there? So we're adding, that's my point, is we're adding a signalized intersection to the mix. Again, I know you brought it up a while back, and, I've just totally forgotten, but there isn't and where the signalized first one would be is right where the crosswalk is today, or are you gonna move where the crosswalk is?
No, it's all the same. The principle of this, my understanding is, from sitting in the Massdot projects long before this was fully designed, right, was what they were trying to do was find a location where there would be an intersection, and they felt like the intersection drove the crosswalk, not the crosswalk drove the intersection. Where the crosswalk ended up is then where we end up starting designing where the dorm might go, right? But I think,
Well, fair enough.
but
Okay,
they all
so
come
that's
together.
fine. That's fine. I guess my point would be, and that makes sense in flipping the order
Mm-hmm.
there, because today I think there's a huge, still a safety problem, both for pedestrians and for drivers. And this argument might clean it up, but from an overall traffic point of view, it seems to me that, again, the whole point we've been making about congestion is you're adding another intersection within a very short period of time, and you're going to have it with a crosswalk. And anytime there's a crosswalk, that means you're going to give them 15 seconds or 20 seconds and so forth. It just intuitively says to me that's going to back things up.
So
Yeah.
I would just say this on behalf of the college. Our perspective is not necessarily that it won't slow it down, and we share the same concerns, because if traffic is blocked up on 114, it blocks people from getting in and out of the campus. So I think we're all in this together, despite how sometimes this comes across. But I would add the following. From our perspective, and I go back to the presentation that I did 2 weeks ago, from our perspective, we're not starting with the existing is going to be existing. We're convinced, if for no other reason than intellectually, that something in the future will happen at Royal Crest, right? And whether it's this project or something will happen. So traffic counts will change, right? There may not be a crosswalk need if it ends up being something that's, very different than this. But at the end of the day, something will change there. Something will happen that'll change on 114. If the 114 project goes through without this project, I actually think the state would probably redesign some of it, at least in all the conversations I've been in. But let's say that doesn't happen. It will only make Royal Crest more attractive to build on something in the future. So from our perspective, we look at this and saying, where it is today will not be the case. What it will be in the future could be this project or something else, but it'll certainly be more. What will that mean? So I can just tell you, back to the question that Kelly had asked earlier, right? It may not affect the North Andover side, but it's certainly on the Andover side, we look at it and say, okay, do we reconsider some of the roads internally so that our traffic doesn't get onto 114 but gets onto 125? And what was the impact? I think that's to Kelly's point. Again, that's on the Andover side of the campus. But it does actually have some marketable impact. And I think, again, from my perspective, these are the conversations that if we're fortunate enough to get into the public realm beyond these, right, these are the moments you come together and figure out what is the true impact along the way, right? Because I do think that it's hard when we're simply looking at it as what this particular project might be, as opposed to something's going to happen there, so what fits in that, and then what are the impacts on traffic and lights and everything like that. So, so I think, again, from our perspective, this is where we sit when it comes to the overpass, and this is where we believe will be on the parking, but I'm assuming on the traffic. But, I think once we get to a place where we can talk about this in a way that it's more interactive, we may find that there are other solutions.
Gina, is there something you wanted to ask, Brad?
what I was going to say, but I did want to add that Peter at the last meeting had requested commentary from the police chief,
Okay.
and he will be submitting a memo for the next meeting. So he wanted to talk to a few more of his supervisors before submitting that, so.
Okay. Anything else before we continue on? Okay, thank you. That was very helpful for
Thank you.
everybody.
If I could just make two quick final points, then I'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Just one clarification from earlier when we were talking about the difficulty of the pedestrian crossings. I just want to point out that the increased volume on 114 does not necessarily make pedestrian crossings more difficult, because it is push-button actuated as part of the signal. It will get called when a pedestrian pushes it. So the higher volumes don't necessarily make the crossing more difficult, because they'll be allocated the same time that they need to cross, regardless of the traffic volume on 114. And then lastly, obviously, we know this is a big issue for folks, and the proponent has agreed to revisit the matter if issues arise after the first phase of the project. So we can keep the conversation going if that arises. And then just to summarize, moving forward, the letter that we
Hey,
submitted.
Tom,
Yeah,
can I just make a quick comment before we go to the summary?
sure.
So I truly do not want to be argumentative, and I agree with the presenter's point about the light signal and same time to cross, and therefore, in that analysis, the busier road doesn't make a difference. But I'll pose a question. Has anybody ever seen a student decide to cross a road not at a crosswalk? There'll be 1,000 of them. In that case, which I suppose will happen, a busier road makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, the 114 corridor improvement project is designed to be a complete streets project. It is geared towards accommodating pedestrians, not only at this intersection, but throughout the corridor with sidewalks and bike paths, et cetera. So the design itself is geared towards accommodating those pedestrians wherever they want to cross.
Right, and in this case, part of the discussion that is intended for constructive purposes is to also consider for thought the possibility of an aerial crosswalk to take a large portion of the student volume safely above that busy roadway.
Understood. So just to wrap up, as we mentioned earlier, the letter that we sent to the town will be reviewed by VAI. So they will look at all the analysis and the trip generation projections as part of that. Looking further out, the MEPA process is going to be another level of review. Will be full traffic review by Massdot. It'll be a 3-submission process. And Massdot traffic monitoring program is something I mentioned a couple times, but just want to reiterate that that is definitely a good way to check all the assumptions and projections and calculations that were in the traffic study. So this is certainly by no means the last discussion on traffic. Just wanted to make sure that people are aware that there will be much more review and further analysis in the future.
Okay. Let's go on to utility and infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. So if you recall, we did present a detailed memo speaking to utility service to the site as well as infrastructure on the site, and as proposed. There were a number of questions that came out of that presentation and out of the submission of that memo. We've responded to those questions. Jeff Cataret's here from VHB can respond to and describe the responses.
Okay. Hi, Jeff Ketters with VHB again. So we had kind of 4 major questions to take away, and that's what we look to summarize here. So the first one, we had talked about the use of low-flow fixtures as means to cut down on the water demand. So, well, kind of difficult at this stage in the project to give, a total exact overall number. What we tried to do is break down some sample cases here. So we want to give you guys a chart just comparing a series of different fixtures, and the column on the left, the maximum installed flush rate, that's more original or basic, either gallons per minute if it's a running faucet or a shower head, or gallons per flush for a toilet. And then the middle column there we added is typically what we're seeing if those become the low flow use fixtures. And we just we added a percent reduction column on the right side, just comparing those rates. So granted, no, these are a function of how many of these you have throughout the site. We worked with the master planner team and the Elkis folks, and just digging back historically on some previous projects and examples they've compared it to. They said overall we could attribute about 30 to 40% reduction for the building systems. So that's exclusive of kind of other site areas such as irrigation or any other water uses on site. So it's certainly something we can follow up as the building design gets refined. But just wanted to give you guys kind of some order of magnitude on what that reduction rates could be. Comment 2, I think, was regarding the sewer capacity. Based on the estimated sewer generation, we're doing about 160,000 gallons per day to support the revised program. So we took that back. We had a discussion with the DPW folks and mapped out the routing. And as part of this attachments, one of the attachments to the letter is a quick map showing the sewer system routing from the Royal Crest site down 114 to Waverly Street to Mass Ave and over to Sutton Street down to the GLSD plant. In review with DPW, they kind of honed in essentially the sewer line from Royal Crest down 114 to Waverly Street is a combination of a 12-inch, 15-inch, some of it vitrified clay, so older pipe. Once you get to Waverly Street, it's a 30-inch main. And there were no capacity concerns essentially from there down. So kind of the focal area that was flagged by DPW as an area that we would study if the project moved forward was from the Royal Crest site down to Waverly.
Eitan, quick question.
I think John's got one.
Sure.
And then-
Yeah, I haven't parsed every word, but in the responsive comment too, but I noticed there's a lot of what I'm going to call weasel words in there. Not anticipated to, not anticipated, should be approved, more detailed study could be conducted. Is this a slam dunk or not? Because it's heavily, the comment is heavily hedged. I can't tell, there's no numbers, so I can't tell like if this is a chip shot or whether there's some real issues here or, issues that could readily be addressed. It's just not clear. It's a very ambiguous answer.
No, understood. I think what we would suggest is a study will need to be done to verify that number regardless. No sewer connections would be made tied to the project unless we could document and define that capacity was sufficient. So I guess we don't have a concrete answer for you to say, yes, it's X percent that we're going to chip away. What we're suggesting is this is a study we would perform as we get into the development plan project review process once we're introducing those flows and verify that amount. So understood, it's not we don't have a concrete number at this point. We do agree that evaluation would need to be performed prior to any connections to the system.
The director responded with these comments, essentially saying, yes, we've talked to them, yes, we have their numbers, but until a project review comes forward, we'll have it peer reviewed once a project review comes forward. So if it does progress to an application, they would peer review all these numbers. And again, put it in writing here, just so everybody's aware, that'll be part of the review process.
Peter?
Oh, sorry, and just to tag on that,
Yeah.
our understanding from DPW is that they have a third-party consultant that they would hire as part of that process that would vet the data from our end.
Yep, that's the peer review process
Yep,
that they'll
yep,
go through.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Eitan, and thanks for this presentation. Thank you for looking into the utilities and the sewage. Just a question of clarification. You spoke about the sewer lines between Royal Crest and the pumping station. the line running down 114 and the line running across Waverly, are you referring to no capacity concerns with respect to the sewage lines, or no capacity concerns with respect to both the sewer lines and any pumping stations that they pass through?
Both is our understanding, but again, it's qualitative at this point.
And do you happen to know how many pumping stations are involved between Royal Crest and the treatment plant?
There's one at Riverview Street that is operated by the GLSD outside of the town's system limit.
But that's the only pumping station between Royal Crest and the treatment plant?
That is our understanding. Yep.
Thank you.
So you think that so you said there's one smaller pipe, or we're on two smaller pipes, and then it gets to a larger pipe. And so that first smaller pipe may be where issues arise.
Correct. Yeah.
If that were the case, what are some possible solutions there?
Depending on what the issues are, it seems like some of it might be attributed just to the fact that it's older infrastructure. So the pipe could be fine, but maybe it's failing because it's old clay. So it could be a form of lining the system. It could be spot replacements of any sections that were failed, or potentially upsizing the pipe. Any one of those three, essentially.
Okay, and so after, if a study and peer review was done during the development review portion, then that could be addressed as part of or prior to permitting? Is that fair?
Correct.
Jean, is that fair?
So again, I'll bring up the Princeton property development required some off-site infrastructure replacement. So it was very similar, those two segments on French Farm Road that had to be replaced. So it was a condition prior to, I think, a certificate of occupancy, that those were upgraded.
And then different ones, as part of the development project for Amazon, there was, sewer building out and things like that. So I think there are a couple of different ways to get where you might need to go if there was a problem. But as long as that's something that can be studied, analyzed, and for sure, either it's not a problem or it could be a problem. And if it could be a problem, then I think upgrades need to be made before any permitting is kind of allowed. As long as that's all part of the process, then I think where we are today is okay. And it's good that we've had the discussion. Okay, continue, please.
So next, comment 3 here was, again, on the sewer issue, but we just want to dive in and give a little more clarity on the sewer generation table that we provided. So maybe, I don't know if we could flip to that attachment at the end. So what we did is we had a little clarity here. I know there was some confusion on the family dwelling roles. We had some clarification at the bottom just to explain where those came from. But this chart is geared at giving a breakdown of the existing conditions, which is the top row, and what's currently generated by the existing buildings on site, about the 140,000 gallons per day. Second set of rows is the proposed full build master plan, which is just shy of 300,000 gallons. And the net new, essentially the increase associated with the project, is a maximum of just shy of 160,000 gallons per day. This also does not account for, I think we mentioned last meeting, we're committed to looking into inflow and infiltration study, and we've discussed that with DPW as well, to look for any sort of illicit connections to the systems, which would only reduce that number. So that 160 there is a worst case scenario of the full build. I think there was a question on where these, or some detail on the rates that are shown here. So just to give a little background, those are based on Mass State Code. It's from Title V, and those are that's the Mass DEP required rates for us to use based on the associated programs. And kind of tying this back to some of the low flow fixtures, those rates have been around. I guess they predate a lot of these low flow fixtures being introduced, so they're certainly conservative to begin with, that they're not based on any water saving technologies, and going back to the last century. And it's not super clear it's not specifically stated in the code, but we just provided a quick example that if anything's not from the DEP chart, they generally require you to use 200% of your average water meter reading. So to kind of best answer the question on what peaking rates or factors of safety are included, I would say it's not specifically stated, but generally the DEP rates are multiplied by 2 to be conservative.
Under the existing, is that actually just a estimate, or is that what it actually is?
The 110?
Well,
Or
the
the-
1284 times 110 gives you 141. Is that really what the flowage is today, or is that just like the modeled?
I would say it's, in actuality, it's less than that, because the 110 is definitely a high. It's peaked to give a kind of worst case scenario for, it's intended to be that part of the day when you have the most use. So it's, the 110 is higher.
But it's from the code.
It's a code, yeah.
It's the same
yeah.
existing as it is for proposed.
Correct.
Okay, is there nothing, again, this may be a trivial amount, but like if you have any lawns or gardens or anything like that, do you add in something incremental for that, or is that just caught up in your
Yeah,
unit
good.
counts?
A rule of thumb is that net new generation, you add 10% to that as far as are you asking what your water demand is
Yeah.
related to that? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a 10% in generally is a rule of thumb we use.
Okay. So it would be 10% higher?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions?
And then I think the last question posed, that I'm not sure we have too much of an answer, but we understand that Weston and Sampson's been engaged to conduct a hydraulic model so that we can respond to the water demand and capacity questions. We did discuss this with DPW as well and confirm that once that is prepared and set, we'll be able to take the estimated water demand, that 173 1,000 gallons per day, and they'll be able to plug that into the model to verify what that does to the system capacity. So we understand that's underway, and we'll just have to follow up when that's complete.
Dumb question, is there any peak load factor for water, or is it just measured over the course of the day?
Peaks an interesting, where the peaking comes in is that's a good question. I would say there's, I almost want to call it a factor of safety and not necessarily a peaking factor. And it's not really broken up between times a day here as far as a water use. It's more,
I mean,
I'm
my
gonna have to-
only
yeah,
point is, and this is
it-
fine, I'm not meant to be, but it would seem to me that in any given hour, there's a peak amount of water you can put through the pipes anyway, right?
yeah, given the system, the pressure and
Yeah.
flow in the system, at some point, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Peter, did you have something?
Yeah, I did, Eitan, thank you. It's just a quick question, if I could put it to Jean. Jean, the presenter's talking about demand on the water supply and the study that the town is doing. Is that correct, that that's in process and will be available as the presenter described?
Yep, I think at the last meeting, I gave an update that they were in data collection mode. I think they're probably still in that, so I don't have an estimated end date, but they've contracted with the consultant to do that study.
Okay, great, thanks a lot.
Yep.
Is part of that study, is there, so I understand that the general question is, well, kind of what's the capacity, and where we're at, but is there anything of, even if we were, fine with capacity, are there ways to increase or maintain the capacity that we have, assuming, just general future building in town? Like, what are good ways that we can actually, increase water in the lake, in capacity? Not necessarily related to this project, but what are those ways? Because if there are those ways, and we ever did find out that this project or another project or something was causing an increase in the use or a decrease in the capacity, then those are things that we could, potentially make as part of conditions or make as part of development agreements. Okay, fine, you're lowering our capacity 5%. Is there something you could pay for to earn that back somehow? I don't know what those things are, whether it's erosion control or whether it's doing things around the lake to make there more. Well, I don't know, but I don't know if that's part. But if that's a question we could ask. Okay. Peter, does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a really good insight, Eitan. And, my off the top of the head is, I don't know there's a lot you can do to increase the amount of water in the lake. But if you look at it as a net equation, there certainly are known leaks in the system.
Right.
They may not know exactly where the leak is, but, the age of the pipes. And so just as, to continue the thought process, it could be that, hey, we've been trying to replace this line for a long time because we know it's, a cause of significant leakage. Maybe that's a way that a contribution is made to an effort by the town to reduce the net loss. But it's a great question.
Right, yeah, so that's a good example of something you could be, I don't know if they're, more physical things, but yeah, are there ways to address the issue that either we can't figure out or we can't pay for or something like that, that someone, again, not necessarily limiting it to this project, but could do. Again, it's just a way to, if we're gonna have things that have cause us to have less capacity, are there ways to fix it, to contribute, so, okay.
I believe that's all we had on the utility side, but unless there's any other questions.
Nope, let's keep going.
Sure.
Okay, so the next document is a memo related to stormwater and drainage. That was submitted for peer review. So just as a reminder of the process that we've undergone for this, many, many months ago, our team had done a presentation to this board related to stormwater and drainage. We expanded upon that presentation, which detailed our approach, and we submitted that to the town for peer review. The town hired a peer reviewer. They have reviewed that initial memo. The peer reviewer, in general, concurred or agreed with the findings or found them acceptable. There were a number of questions. VHB, Jeff in particular, put together answers to those questions to provide some more detail for this stage of the process. So that's what's here before you now. This has gone back to the peer reviewer. She is going to review it. That has not occurred yet, I don't believe, Jean.
Not responded yet, she does have it.
Yes. So this is something that we're prepared to talk about now. We could talk about it in the future. We, based on the responses, we feel that the detail is sufficient at this point, but, we can go into any detail you want tonight.
No, why don't we wait to get the peer review and then go through it from there?
And,
Okay.
and this was a combined scope and questions to the peer reviewer from Conservation as well as myself, so.
Okay, great.
Eventually, it will get to the Conservation Commission on their agenda too.
Okay.
Yes. All right, so the next document is a one-pager. And this is a document that details, for reference, density and dimensional analysis of our proposed project versus or compared to other projects that have been either built or permitted within the town of North Andover, essentially over the last 10 years. So this was just publicly available information. We put this together, again, for reference to compare what we have proposed here on this very large 77-acre site compared to some of the other sites in town that have multifamily and/or mixed-use developments. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this, but really, again, this is for reference, in reference to the board. We've gotten a lot of questions about density. When you look at it on a purely numbers basis, our proposed project, as it stands before you today, by many measures, is in line with other developments within town, again, that have been built already and are operational or have been permitted.
Any questions or comments? Peter?
Yeah, Eitan, you know, the presenter is asserting that it's in line, so walk us through an example here to show us how it's in line.
Okay, so in the very last column on this particular table, it utilizes or compares units per acre, which is a fairly typical, and this is related to the residential component, which is the largest component of our project and is the largest component of these other comparable projects. So as you can see, the units per acre as it's proposed in our current program is 17 units per acre. Some of the recently, again, built or permitted projects in town are roughly in line with that.
So what are those?
So Avalon, for example, is at 18 units per acre. The Minco project at 505 Sutton Street is at 42 units per acre. Berry Farms, which is on a much larger parcel, a lot of it's covered by wetlands, is at 8 units per acre. And Princeton Properties, if you look at the residential part, because that particular project was split into two pieces. The residential, again, density of units per acre is 21 units per acre. If you look at it, including the retail portion of that site, it's at 14 units per acre. But if you look at all these on average, they're at 20 units per acre, whereas ours is at 17 per acre.
And what is your definition of unit for Royal Crest for this analysis?
So it includes all of the residential units, including the townhouses and the student housing. So the student housing is the equivalent, as we've been consistently showing, at 250 equivalent units. That is included within that calculation.
So you took the total number of units and divided by the total acreage.
That's correct.
Okay.
So really
So
what,
you didn't factor in any of the non-residential uses?
so we did. So that's in the column next to it. That's on a fairly,
But what you've talked about so far
Correct.
excludes that, okay.
yes.
That's
What
fine.
we've talked about so far.
I know
is-
where you're going with
Yep.
it, yeah.
So another measure that is typically used to measure density is floor area ratio. And that takes into account all of the uses. So that includes all of the residential, includes all of the associated amenity spaces or common areas, includes the retail, includes the hotel, includes the office, includes every component of the project. So our floor area ratio is 0.66.
At full build-out?
At full build-out. So Avalon, for example, is at 0.47. Princeton Properties, again, the residential component is at 0.60. If you look at it overall, it's at 0.48. The 505 Sutton Street is at 1.1. So by that particular measure, that project is quite a bit denser than our proposal. Again, on average, the floor area ratio is 0.68. We're at 0.66. And again, that's a function of the size of our site. So yes, it is a big project, but when you consider the size of the site and how it interacts with all of that land, that's how we arrived at these figures.
Gina, is that a standard way to calculate floor area ratio?
I would say it's been noted, I'm not sure if it's noted on here, but the parking structures will be considered part of the floor area ratio.
Yes.
And that brings it just north of 7
Yes.
feet or so.
Yes, that's correct.
And the only other note I'll make is the senior center's public-private partnership with Minco for the Sutton Street project here. You'll likely recall, it kind of jumps off the page, but they went for a variance for floor area ratio, And consideration was given to them donating approximately 60,000 square feet of land to a senior center as opposed to building housing on it. And so it's
Yeah,
skewed a little
that's
bit with that
A
history.
little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And this isn't meant to cast any of those projects in a bad
Yeah.
light whatsoever, but really it's just meant to, put things in perspective.
Okay. Great.
Okay. And then lastly is a document that you've seen many times, and per your request or the board's request, we will be including the program summary at every meeting that we present at. It will be updated, so if there is any information that seems appropriate, and we'll confer with Jean and others to make sure that we're capturing everything. But we'll consistently carry this so that the board has, relatively quick access to the information as it is presented, as it relates to the existing Royal Crest, as it was presented originally in January of 2021, and then, subsequently modified and reduced in August of 2021. This particular version, for example, there was a request that we add the sewage generation numbers that we just went over, so that's been added to this. We also synced the population figures with the fiscal impact study numbers, which were more accurate than the numbers that we had before. The previous numbers that we had presented within this document were based on sort of standard HUD, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development numbers. The fiscal impact study, you utilize actual census data numbers from North Andover. So we found those to be more accurate. We compared those. Those are now synced together and included in this document.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, anybody have questions or comments before we kind of talk about kind of the procedure going forward? Okay, so what I see is the procedure going forward, and then I'd be happy to do questions or comments. The next thing I think we need to decide is what happens with this item that we've been discussing now. So we've been discussing this now for, I don't know, have we hit a year? Over a year. So the ultimate question is, does this go to town meeting for a vote? And I think that's kind of our next procedural step. So we have the option to say that this will be a planning board sponsored item that goes to a vote at the next town meeting, or we have the option to say, no, it doesn't. So if we say, if we don't want this to go to town meeting, then I guess we'll take some sort of vote. I'm trying to still formulate exactly what the vote would be. But whether or not to have this as a warrant article is probably what the vote would be. If we say no, then it's pretty much just done from there. If we say yes, then the next steps would be to have the zoning working group present to us, go through the zoning, really get the zoning in line the best we think we can. Then once that zoning is, we think, at kind of its best shape, then we have public hearings, public meetings and public hearings. Then after those public hearings, it's at that point that the planning board makes a recommendation, favorable, unfavorable, or no action. So does the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and then it goes to town meeting. Just to clarify that we can put an article on and vote favorable action, we can put an article on and vote unfavorable action, we can put an article on and take no position. But I think the first question before we go through months of zoning is, should this go to town meeting for a vote? Whether we ultimately recommend it or not, I think is a question that I don't think we should decide until we've had public hearings. I think that's always the process, and I don't think it's right for us to make a decision until we've had public input and public hearings on the actual zoning. But before we go through 4 or 5 months or 4 months or however long it takes to go through the zoning, I think we need to have a vote as to whether or not we think this proposal as a project should go before town meeting. One thing I was thinking is it might be beneficial to have Suzanne or someone from the working group present what is a summary of what the zoning is kind of looks like, what it involves, like as a summary of what would come back to the board for votes, what, what's in there, what's the proportion of the town meeting that would need to vote yes? Is it 2/3 or is it 50% under the housing choice? Just a basic summary so we kind of know what the overall general zoning looks like. And then, if we're moving forward with this, then we can get into the, nitty-gritty details of the zoning, which include setbacks, which include heights, which include, what special permits need to be granted in the future and what conditions can be applied, all those kind of things. So that's kind of what I see as the next steps. So I guess, anyone have comments or questions on those as next steps? Does that all make sense? Is there more information that we need to gather before going with that, or are people ready to kind of, I guess just any comments people have on that? Okay, anybody, anything? Okay, so I guess that will be the next step. So let's plan on, I think, when's our next meeting?
November 2nd, which is only next Tuesday.
Okay, so November 2nd. So I think I'd like to have someone from the zoning working group, Suzanne, if she's available, just come talk to us about a summary of what the zoning entails. And then I think we should take a vote as to whether or not to have this as a warrant article. Again, we're not making a recommendation yet. That's not our process and not our place, but I do think it's important that we think about, the work that we've done here, the questions that we've asked, and whether or not this should be a town meeting warrant article. And I'll give my opinion, and we'll talk about that at the next meeting. But I just want people to think about that. And if anyone has questions about the process, talk to me, talk to Jean, talk to Suzanne about that. Okay? Okay. Can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion made by John. Seconded. All in favor? Kelly?
Yes.
Alyssa? Yes. Peter?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.